This time we're going to talk about multiplying complex numbers. When we multiply complex numbers, it's exactly like when we multiply numbers with variables, but at the end we're only going to end up with I in the answer. You are going to have to use your powers of I and simplify a little bit further. So in the case of 2i, we have 2i squared. So it ends up being 2i times 2i, which is the same as just distributing the power to each of the numbers inside. 2 squared and then an I squared. And that's going to be 4i squared, because I'm going to multiply 2 times 2, and I'm going to multiply I times I. Now, looking back at your notes, you know that I squared is equal to -1. So for I squared, I'm going to plug in -1. And so my final answer is going to be -4 in this case. Again, we have 5i, and that whole quantity is cubed. And the reason we cube the whole quantity is because both 5 and I are inside the parentheses. So in this case, it ends up being 5i times 5i times 5i. Or you can just say 5 cubed and I cubed. So I take my real numbers, 5 times 5 times 5, which is 125, and then I take I to third power. So looking at your powers of I worksheet, you can see that I cubed is equal to -I. So I just plug in 125 times -I, and that answer is -125I. It gets a little bit more complicated when we have two terms inside each of the parentheses. So in this case, notice, and this is the big thing that you guys missed yesterday on the quiz review, or had questions about on the quiz review, is the fact that whenever there is no sign in between the parentheses, that means multiplication. Whenever you're multiplying two quantities in the parentheses, that's when you're FOILing. So I'm going to do first, so that's -8 times 2 is -16. And I'm going to do outside, and that's -8 times 4i, that's -32i. And then I'm going to do inside, and that's going to be 8i times 2, which is plus 16i. And then I'm going to do last, and that's going to be 8i times 4i, which is going to be 32i squared. So I just go ahead and simplify, and that's going to be -16i plus 32i squared. And like we stated earlier, I squared is equal to -1. So I'm going to plug in -1 for I squared, and it becomes -16 minus 16i minus 32. And then I'm going to combine like terms, so that's -48 minus 16i. So that is my final answer. So basically, you're just making sure that you multiply each of the terms in the first parentheses by each of the terms in the second when you're multiplying or distributing out. So again, kind of the same way, I'm going to FOIL. 7 times -4 is -28. I'm going to do outside, which is going to be plus 35i. I'm going to do inside, which is going to be, I'm going to do inside, which is going to be plus 12, and then, or positive 12, and then I'm going to do -3i times 5i, and so that is going to be -15i squared. So when I get to this point, I'm just going to combine like terms, and I have -16 plus 35i, and then I'm going to plug in I squared. I'm going to plug in -1 for I squared, so that's going to be positive 15. And then I have -1 plus 35i is our final answer. So this kind of gives you an idea of how you do it, and you do it the same way as if this I right here was x. So moving on down to these that look a little bit different, I have to multiply two terms at a time. So I have -3 times positive 7, that's -21. And then I have 8 plus 2i. So when I have negative 21i, I'm sorry, because there's an I there, I forgot that, then I have to distribute that out. And so that becomes negative 168i minus 42i squared. And at this point, substitute in for I squared, so negative 168i plus 42. And we would write it as the real number first. So that is your final answer. And then this one is the same as A through D, and I just am going to FOIL it. And so I do first, I do outside, I do inside, and then I do last. And negative 28 plus 2i plus 6i squared. And for I squared, I plug in negative 1 plus 2i minus 6. And then I combine like terms, negative 34 plus 2i. And then I'm going to, oh, that's perfect. And that is your final answer.